Greetings, everyone. In this video, we are going to continue our study of propositional logic, some of the properties of propositional logic. And in particular, I would like to focus on the idea of the main operator. And the main operator essentially refers to the most important logical operator in any complex sentence. So in the past videos, we had a look at complex sentences, which are composed of simple statements, which we use variables to represent, simple letters, right? P, Q, whatever the case may be, to stand in for the parts of the complex sentence. And then we walked through the different logical operators that are used to stand in for the connectives in our sentences. Things like negation represents it is not the case that. Conditionals stand in for sentences that have an if-then kind of structure. Conjunction translates connectives like and but, or disjunction, which can translate either or. So by now we should be pretty well acquainted with the meaning of those operators, but in this video I want to look in further at how we can translate complex sentences, and the way we do that is by coming to an understanding of the main operator. So the main operator has the entire well-formed formula in its scope. And there's a couple of factors to bear in mind when considering the main operator in any complex sentence. First, it has as its range the largest component or components in a compound statement. In other words, you should think of the main operator as, in essence, the driver of the meaning of the entire sentence. It seems to govern all other component parts of a complex sentence. So the main operator is, in a way, the most important piece of the wider puzzle that is a propositional statement. The main operator has either one of the four operators that go between statements or the negation. So it could be a dot, it could be wedge, it could be biconditional, it could be horseshoe, right? It depends on the arrangement and the function that it's serving within the context of a wider statement. So as we proceed through some examples, the goal for us will be to become familiar with how to identify the main operator in any given complex sentence. There can only be one main operator. That's the good news. There is always one main operator in a complex statement whenever we have more than one operator. And so being able to pick up on that main operator will go a very long way in being able to parse out and translate the meaning of the proposition. So let's compare some examples. If we have a complex statement like this, you'll notice a number of logical operators involved here. I see a tilde, I see a wedge, I see another tilde, I see a conjunction, and I see a horseshoe. The main operator of this complex statement has to be the tilde, the negation. So what's happening here is that everything in parentheses and brackets is being treated, in essence, as a single statement, and the negation is a negation of this entire statement. So tilde is the most important logical operator here, as it is, in essence, saying that whole statement is not the case. Whatever the truth value, and we'll talk more about the truth values of propositions, whatever it happens to be, this tilde is flipping that truth value. So this complex statement reads, it is not the case that both either P or not Q and if R then S. So another way of parsing out the statement is identifying, in a way, the next most important operator in the statement, which for me is conjunction. The conjunction is bringing together these conjuncts, the statements that occur in parentheses, either P or not Q, and this conjunct, the conditional, if R then S. So within brackets, we have conjunction 1, either P or not Q, and conjunction 2, if R, then S. This is brought together by dot, which sort of signifies and or but, those kinds of connectives. And then that entire statement is being negated by tilde. Notice that the dot, however, cannot be the main operator. It is still not as important as the negation. The negation being outside of both parentheses and brackets is the most important operator, so it is the main operator. If we have a look at a slightly modified version of that statement, you will notice that dot in this context is the main operator. In this case, we don't have a tilde that is negating anything. We just have two conjuncts. This is our first conjunct, either P or not Q. This kind of constitutes conjunct 1. And then conjunct 2 seems to be brought together by horseshoe, if R, then S. So this sentence reads, both either P or not Q, and if R, then S. So dot in this instance has to be our main operator. It is outside of parentheses, and it is conjoining these two complex statements into a compound statement. Okay, so just a slight tweakage of examples here. No tilde means very different. We have a very different statement on our hands, right? If we look at this example, this is a fairly complicated arrangement of variables and operators. You'll notice wedge, tilde, another wedge, conditional, I see parentheses, I see brackets. Again, follow our rule. The main operator has to be placed outside of the parentheses and the brackets. So we know that the disjunction, V, the wedge, has to be our main operator. So wedge, the meaning of wedge translates either or. So this is kind of an either or sentence with two different disjuncts. So my first disjunct is the variable P right here, and it is bringing together under the aspect of disjunction this whole statement, either Q or if R, then S. This whole statement constitutes the second disjunct, and it just so happens that within that disjunct we have another disjunction with the first disjunct being not Q, right? And the second being this whole conditional, if R, then S. So notice how we're kind of chunking parts of these compound statements into bits, into smaller bits. And so without the usage of this main operator, we would very easily be lost in the fray. We wouldn't know, for example, without the brackets, whether or not this disjunction was referring to a disjunction of P and not Q, or a disjunction of P and this whole statement. So the main operator is really the key single element in determining the meaning of the whole sentence. So let's look at some further examples to get sort of a feel for this stuff. If you have a complex statement like this, try to, on your own, identify the main operator of this sentence. To me, this reads, it is not the case that if both A and C, then either B or D. So try to find the main operator. It looks like there are a number of different operators, tilde, dot, horseshoe, and wedge. Which one is the main operator? If you said tilde, negation, you are correct, right? We have tilde outside of parentheses, right? So it is negating this entire line, right? It's negating this entire statement. Everything that is happening in parentheses and brackets is being negated by the tilde. And then within the brackets, we have a horseshoe, so we have a conditional with this whole statement functioning as an antecedent, both A and C, and this whole disjunction functioning as a consequent, either B or D. So we know that the wedge here can't be the main operator because that's already just a component part of horseshoe. And we know that dot can't be the main operator because that's just a component part of horseshoe as well. And horseshoe itself, while a very important operator, bringing together these two parts within brackets is itself being negated, right? So really the negation is a negation of horseshoe, right? So think of it as sort of unfolding in terms of a hierarchy of significance, a hierarchy of importance, right? The negation is the most important component of this whole statement. Now have a look at this example. Try not to pay attention to the dot here. That's just a bullet point. The statement reads either if both A and C, then not B, or D. So this is a sort of a clunky, convoluted sentence. I see dot, I see horseshoe, I see tilde, I see wedge. Try to identify for yourself the main operator of the sentence. If you have picked wedge, you are correct. Wedge occurs outside of parentheses and brackets, right? Anything in parentheses and brackets we know cannot be the main operator. So that's a kind of nifty trick that sort of signals to us right away that really what is going on in this sentence is a disjunction, an either or between, this whole component, this whole block, as it were, which forms sort of a disjunct all of its own, which is in need of parsing, and this disjunct, D. So this sentence kind of says either this whole thing or D. So it says either if both A and C, then not B, or D. So wedge has to be the main operator. It's governing the meaning of the sentence. And this first disjunct is a little bit confusing just by itself. So we have to parse it a little bit further. I would take the horseshoe to be the most important operator within the parenthesis because it is serving to differentiate the antecedent, both A and C, from the consequent, not B, right? And so within the antecedent, we have the operator dot, conjunction, both A and C, constitutes an antecedent, and not B is the consequent of this conditional. So horseshoe can't be the main operator, even though it is a very important operator. It is governing the meaning of everything within brackets, but it itself is only a component of this bigger disjunction, right? So the disjunction, the wedge, is governing a bigger range of components, and so it is the main operator. Okay, this will take practice to get the trick, get the hang of it, but it's important to know that they're outside. The main operator is always outside parentheses and brackets. So locating the main operator helps us to translate sentences and to place parentheses accurately. And we need those parentheses in accurate locations in order to understand sort of the weight of the sentence. So if we look at an ordinary sentence like this, either Tracy or Becky owns a DVD player, but Sophie owns one for sure. This sentence has a couple of connectives in need of translation. Either or gets translated with the wedge, and but gets translated with a dot. It's a kind of a conjunction. Remember that dot can translate both but and. So in order to translate this sentence out into logical propositional form, we need that either or, that wedge, to be set off in parentheses over here. And it's really this but, it's really this conjunction that is the main operator, right? Bringing together the first conjunct, either Tracy or Becky owns a DVD player, but Sophie owns one for sure. So dot is really conjoining this whole statement as a conjunct and this variable s as the second conjunct. So we would be lost if we didn't know that dot was the main operator, because we wouldn't quite know what the stress of the conjunction is, of what the disjunction is. All right, so dot has to be outside of parentheses in order for this translation to work. So sometimes I think moving from ordinary language to logical propositional form is even trickier than the reverse, because our language actually can be a little bit ambivalent in terms of what the most important connective is. Here's another even more complicated example that will sort of illustrate this. If Julian does not become a lifeguard at the YMCA or get the job driving school buses, then he will keep working at the bookstore in San Francisco and clean houses part-time. This is sort of a convoluted sentence, but in order to translate it into propositional logic, we need to first be able to identify the connectives, right? So what are the part of the sentence that need logical operators? And then what are the part of the sentences that need variables? And then can we identify the main operator such that we can build this sentence in propositional form in a way that accurately reflects the sense of the sentence. So first, I want you to identify the connectives in this sentence so that we can get a sense for which operators we need. What are the connectives? It seems to me if and then are connectives, right? We have a conditional at some point, right? This is set off by the period. So we have a horseshoe at work for sure. We also have a not, right? So we have a tilde at work, does not become a lifeguard. Okay, so negation is at work. We also have an or, right? So we have perhaps a disjunction at work in not becoming a lifeguard or getting the job driving school buses. So perhaps we need wedge. And then we have a conjunction, right? We have an and. So we're going to need dot in order to bring together working at the bookstore in San Francisco and cleaning houses part-time. So this is a really kind of a messy sentence with a lot of operators and a lot of parts that are forming this compound. So just to kind of get schematic here, I've highlighted the connectives in red. If, not, or really this belongs as a unit, if, then, not, or, and are connectives. And then if we are to translate the clauses into variables so that we can write out the proposition, let's use L to stand in for lifeguard, for becoming a lifeguard. And then D will stand in for driving school buses, as it's this clause. And then let's use the letter K as the variable to stand in for keep working at the bookstore, and C to stand in for clean houses part-time. So with these connectives in mind and this set of variables, I ask you try to write in propositional notation this sentence. Rewrite it using our operators, horseshoe for if then, tilde for not, or for wedge for or, and dot for and L, D, K, and C for their associated parts of the sentence. What would this look like? And the result has to be something like this. So you'll notice we have all of our connectives here, and we need two sets of parentheses to offset or to essentially indicate correctly that the horseshoe includes an antecedent contained in parentheses, and a consequent on this side of the horseshoe. And this tilde has to be a negation of this entire antecedent, right? Because you'll notice the sense of the sentence here is that the antecedent not becoming a lifeguard or not becoming the driver of school buses, right, is contained in this parenthesis. So tilde negates wedge, and horseshoe has to be our main operator, right? The conditional really is the driver of the entire meaning of this sentence, and the consequent is this final conditional: keep working at the bookstore and cleaning houses part-time. So we're going to offset that conditional in parentheses, around which we have K and C. So this full thing reads, if it is not the case that either L or D, then both K and C. So that's really how we would reduce and formalize this sentence into propositional standard notation, with our logical operators functioning for connectives, and with horseshoe in particular serving to indicate our main operator, which is really the if-then component of the sentence. So that can be pretty tricky. If it's okay if you didn't quite get this right, it can be kind of tricky to translate sort of a clunky sentence into propositional logic. But I just want you, for the sake of this video, to get a feeling for the idea that the main operator is used to govern the entire meaning of the sentence, and start to become familiar with being able to pick up the main operator in complex sentences by identifying that, number one, it's got to be outside of parentheses and brackets, and number two, it will have its entire, as its scope, the entire range of the sentence. So in future videos, we'll get more familiar with this and start to learn about the truth functions of complex sentences as well.